Thank you very much for this invitation and for these possibilities to participate in this annual conference on cultural diplomacy. I'm thankful that I meet a lot of friends here, surprisingly, but wonderful. And I must say I was a little bit late than prepared because I had a debate now just with two young ladies from Iraq, Shiites, who got a Sakharov Prize in the European Parliament last Tuesday. Two young girls which were caught by ISIS, raped for years, survived, flying with help of others. And if I can imagine what this means, not just for these individual persons, but also for the understanding of our way to live together and fight each other. This is not a question which has to do with Islam. This happened also more than 70 years ago in this country, in this town. And I think that cultural diplomacy in a broader sense might be helpful to avoid such a future, because this can only be avoided if the right behavior comes into the minds of the people. And otherwise you cannot change it. And we discussed it just with a few people, was in Sarajevo 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Then we see also that happened, that people live together since decades and centuries of different ethnic or religious groups, and suddenly they become two animals and kill each other. The questions we have not solved, and probably we will not solve if we are not able to put another dimension to mankind. Europe and the world are facing several crises: the migration and the refugee crisis, the ongoing terrorist threats, and the war situation in our doorstep in the close neighborhood are putting a lot of pressure on Europe's future stability. In my position as chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, I could further develop today on different conflicts, from the terrific situation in Syria to the continuous fighting in eastern Ukraine with daily ceasefire violations. But so we will not do so, as you are all aware, that Europe is surrounded by a series of destabilization factors. Therefore, thinking of new ways of approaching diplomacy is today urgent. Recently, EU Vice President and High Representative Mrs. Federica Mogherini rightly underlined that soft and hard power to go hand in hand. Her statement was made in the context of the European Union global strategy. We have to say that in many questions of the soft power, the European Union is already quite good. We spend alone from the budget of the European Union twice so much money for prevention, for non-military foreign aid than the United States does, only from the EU budget. And 60% of the developing aid of this earth is paid by the European Union and its member states. But nevertheless, that's not good enough, as we see. And we see also that if we have no hard power, soft power might not have the same results. Carrot without sticks do not work. But this is also not the purpose of my speech today. But Europe should put its effort into reinforcing its defense and security policies, and I believe the European Summit today and yesterday has made a considerable progress in that, which would not have been possible 1 year ago or half a year ago. The promotion of cultural diplomacy as a soft power tool is today an essential goal. It contributes to reducing barriers in understanding and fosters cooperation among different communities. In a world of multiple transnational relationships and further interconnection between societies, cultural diplomacy must be interactive. It must aim to build intercultural understanding and long-term relationship based on trust and credibility rather than delivering one-way messages. It has to be taken also into account universal values, which are described, for example, in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the United Nations. And I believe that this talk by authoritarian leaders, if we talk about such values, that is in the interference in the sovereignty of a country, is not acceptable. We have to accept that there are certain values which are universal. And these are not values that this is the way Europe wants to dominate the world. I think this is universal in all the sense as the United Nations say. Cultural diplomacy aims to contribute to enhancing European influence, for sure too. It's also PR, to show unity in variety, in diversity of the European Union, but that is not and should not be the main aim. And I think the raising awareness of other cultures and our capacity to learn from others is also part of cultural diplomacy. But it should be not only limited to that. Cultural diplomacy's goal should be also to share Europe's multiple and diverse experience in inclusive governance and capacity building. It should convey a vision of culture as a public good that underpins a free and open society. And if I followed part of the debate before, I must say this must be put also in a certain way of our values, which have in Europe mostly our background in the three hills, which are the hills of the Acropolis, of the Capitol, and of Golgotha, combined with enlightenment. But this is, I think, our basis. But if in the sense of openness or not in exclusiveness, that must be very clear. I see my friend of Turkey, and I will try to choose my word quite carefully in that context. And to achieve this goal, Europe should be united in its diversity. This is where the European Union adds value. In that framework, the European Commission and the High Representative presented in June 2016 the joint communication towards the EU strategy for international cultural relations. This communication aims at encouraging cultural cooperation between the EU and its partner countries and promoting a global order based on peace, the rule of law, freedom of expression, mutual understanding and respect for fundamental values. It has also to show the equality of the cultures of the different countries. There is no culture which has a higher value than the other one. If I see this equality, then I think we see it in a way that we can come together and not in a way that one is higher than the other and then it's suppression of what's how felt or a discrimination. It must be, for example, I'm a Catholic, but my wife is a Protestant, so but it must be clear that does not mean I'm convinced of my religion. But that gives me not the right to believe that the religion of someone else has not the same value. If we do that understanding, then we find a way of tolerance, which is very much important also in this way of cultural cooperation. As a response to the joint communication, the European Parliament decided to prepare an own initiative report. This report is involving two committees, the Committee on Culture and Education and the Committee on Foreign Affairs. We are now in the process of jointly working together on this report as co-rapporteurs, and the report will focus on many positive aspects underlined in the joint communication, but I would propose going a step further. We do not want to reinvent the wheel, but we would like to make strong proposal recommendation for achieving concrete, effective actions, even small ones. The proposed report will contribute to defining the roles of many actors and key players in the field of cultural diplomacy, including the importance of empowering civil society actors. It will aim to promote culture as an asset, particularly in the current period of challenges the world and Europe are facing. In the view, we think that the report should be linked to the global strategy of the European Union, which I just mentioned earlier. It is, in my perspective, more than necessary when it comes to intercultural dialogue. Enhancing dialogue between religious community, for example, is essential to foster mutual understanding in the view of preventing and combating extremism, radicalization, and marginalization. This is a question where we have this Islamic extremism, where we should not fall into the trap that extremism means that Islam is extremist. That we make this difference. And sometimes terrorist acts wants to lead us, and I think this is the aim of ISIS, in a situation that in our societies we believe that Islam as such is such a bad religion. We have to prevent that this feeling comes to our own public, which is a wrong and a dangerous one. And if we do it that way, I think we can perhaps find the understanding with the people of goodwill in all cultures and religions. I also believe that culture is a powerful means to achieve other development goals, such as reducing poverty, ensuring sustainable development, and promoting democracy, peace, and security. Moreover, a good knowledge and understanding of local cultural context while drafting and implementing development cooperation projects is of crucial importance. Therefore, I believe that we have such proposals like Erasmus Plus now, and gives us a possibility which also goes across the European Union member countries to bring people together, young people together, in order to find understanding. Therefore, also very much in favor that we come, when the conditions are fulfilled, for visa liberalization for Turkey, for Ukraine and others. For sure, the security conditions must be fulfilled, the conditions. But if we like a government or not does not play a role. But if young people can meet each other to cost which they can bear, it's the best way that people understand each other. If they know each other, politicians can't tell them anymore that their own culture is the better one. We have a higher value than the other. It was also the debate in Europe in the past. Ortega y Gasset once has said, 4/5 of the culture of European countries are the same. 1/5 is different. This 1/5 was in the past used in politics to explain to its own population that we are a country of higher quality and therefore we have the right to wage war against the others who are not of minor importance. Now the young generation in Europe has understood that it's not true. This 1/5 which divides us does not divide us anymore. It's common value. Please do not make it unified. Keep it different. This is one of our values. That is the milk on the cappuccino. To see that not anymore at a dividing thing, but as a common good, a common value. And if we have this understanding and brought it about European culture, also to other cultures in this world, where we come to these universal values, I think this policy must produce and bring forward. And therefore, I think this local cultural context is of the utmost importance, because this has to be done also in regions and cities in cooperation, bringing people together. And I think we have to develop here more cooperation projects, which is of crucial importance. As you know, the European Union has initiated several programs and instruments in the field of cultural diplomacy. Many Director Generals from the European Commission are involved: education and culture, DEFCO, neighborhood policy, in funding projects and actions all over the world. The role of EU member states as key active players and contributors to promote intercultural understanding is very valuable in this field. Therefore, a joint strategic approach is needed to ensure coherence and synergies between different policies already in place and future ones. Furthermore, I would insist on the urgent need to enhance visibility and to ensure proper dissemination of all actions undertaken. We will all be beneficiaries of such a joint strategic approach. In my own conclusion, I would like to underline that I strongly believe that targeted cultural and educational policies can support key EU foreign security policies objectives. These policies contribute to the reinforcement of democracy, the rule of law and the protection of human rights. And if I see at the moment the situation in Africa and migration flows, this is not a question of border controls in the long run. This is a question of development. And if we see that this development has nothing, not only to do with economic conditions, but it's much more important also in other questions. And that a policy, a new Africa policy, which includes all the dimensions, that people feel there at home because they have a living there, where they can keep their identity. Cultural identity is an important part of that, to recognize it. Then I think it's the only way to avoid that these migration flows will go to dimensions nobody can control anymore. And therefore, I think this broader understanding of security and our foreign policy is of the utmost importance to take that to account. We have learned that military means alone achieve nothing. We have seen that in Iraq and in Libya now. You can win formally a war, but if you do not put a broader sense in that people feel at home, that they feel are taken seriously to overcome ethnic problems, old and new ones, if you do not combine it with the education system which takes such values into account, it will become the backlash. An even greater disorder and even greater violation of human rights, as we have seen. And therefore, I think this broader approach to take that into account is of the utmost importance. At the moment, we talk rightly about in the European Union to strengthen our military capabilities, which are disastrous. But in this debate, we should not forget that this broader understanding of foreign security policy is essential, that we overall have a success for a peaceful living together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elmar Brok, for your very good and illuminating talk. We have no time for questions, but we will take some time for questions. So, if we take 2 or 3 questions, could we have some hands in the air?
What do you suggest is the way forward for preventing and stopping conflicts? Because at the moment, we are treating the symptoms and not the cause. We spend billions of dollars on addressing the humanitarian crisis with human resources, and we are ignoring the cause of the conflicts. So we are treating the symptoms but not the cause of disease, and that is not right. What do you see as the way forward?
For different conflicts, we have to give different answers. The conflict in Ukraine, I have no understanding at all. There's not a social reason for that. There's not a discrimination of minorities behind it. It's just a violation against the principle of international law of the territorial integrity and of the sovereignty of nations. And this is political will. And if you have a situation that a country believes, and this is popular, that you have a higher right as a nation, as Russia, in order to have the right to control your neighbors, then this is a very old-fashioned understanding, which my country had in the past, with the terrible results of wars in Europe, civil wars in Europe. We have to overcome in Europe that situation. The equality of nations and the principle of the Helsinki Accord, with this principle of international law, must be decisive. And it cannot be any more a reason for a war that security interests or historical beliefs or a discrimination of minorities, which has not happened in this case, could be a reason for a war. If we would accept that as a reason for a war, I could name you 100 spots in Europe where we can wage war again. That should be forgotten forever. And we have to come back to this situation as we had it for several decades in Europe. The second point is, in other parts, or also what we had on the Balkans, that we have an understanding how people can live together. And here sometimes have social problems a role. If I see the situation in Egypt in these days where ISIS bombs tourist centers in order to make tourism impossible there, and we have 5 million other young people unemployed, and see this economic situation there, and this is combined with certain interest of proxy wars and of ISIS interests and Muslim Brotherhood's interests, then you see that here social backgrounds are used for certain political directions which are not peaceful directions. Therefore, we have to understand that next to that, discussions about values and teaching of values in schools and families is that the question of development of a fair social background, a chance for a living, is also a condition for peaceful living together, and that we have to see this social dimension. That is not the only reason. It should be not also allowed to be an alibi, but we should take away the ground where extremists can convince young people to go in the wrong direction. That others, what I have said, it's a long-term development. And the question is that we can only in an international action to help each other. But lastly, what I have talked about, values must be done in states. You cannot have a central, worldwide, or European policy on that, which forces others to do so. It's a question of interaction, discussion, cooperation to achieve that. It's a long-term thing. You will never be successful totally to 100%, but go forward for progress. And as we were able in Europe to do that for 70 years, it should be also an example to do it perhaps in other places of the world to come to this situation. And I believe that's some of the ways how we should do that. Climate change is an important question in that connection if it comes to Africa.
Mr. Brok, if you could tell us about the EU policy, aid policy towards other countries, third world, and whether this policy is conditional on local governments implementing fair treatment of their populations or not.
Look, first of all, we cannot control national politics despite we give European aid to that. But more and more, it's conditional. In the economic sense, sometimes, if I look into the southern neighborhood policy, we supported individual programs which had no context with each other. There was no strategy behind it to make it a whole economic success story. For example, we failed in Northern Africa to support initiated cross-border cooperation, which is for the peaceful living together as well as for economic success story an important question. Only 15% of the trade of Northern African countries is trade between themselves. The rest is the classical colonial trade line, north-south, which is not really helpful. For sure, it should be strengthened. And perhaps sometimes Italians should be ready to import some olives more and make it not a central question. But if we would initiate cross-border trade between these Northern African countries, it will increase incredibly the richdom of such countries. And here we have this European internal market example to be helpful to look in these cases. Not to build a street in the middle of Algeria, build a street between Algeria and Morocco would have been perhaps make a difference. which we have to think over in order to make this way of connecting interests. The more you connect interests of countries, the less you run in a danger of a war, because you might lose too much. That's the idea behind it. So that is also behind the European integration process, exactly that. The euro is not just interesting because of economic reasons. Helmut Kohl has always said, if we have the euro there, it will be very difficult to divide it again. So people are forced to cooperate, even if it's difficult, as we have seen after this financial crisis 2008. So to be a solidarity with each other, country has a crash. And that keeps politically together despite all the tensions in that connection. And I think here we have to give also examples in that way, that the support we give have a conditionality sometimes in such a direction.
20th century has been the bloodiest century of the entire human history. Fascism has emerged, communism, more than 300 million people were killed. So there is a lack of love in the world. Love was taken away. And then extremism and radicalism now on the name of religion, and you're right, it shouldn't be mixed up with the true religion. So what is the solution? I mean, except the intellectual struggle, education. Instead of putting bullets into the heads of the people, we should put ideas. Ideas has to be changed with the ideas. So with the alliance of the good people, this can be changed, and I'm very hopeful with that. In 5 or 10 years, the world will change through educational campaigns, as German media, British media, American media, and media of other countries should come together and do educational campaigns to remove the ideologies of the fanaticism and extremism, which does not compatible with the true religion, actually. So how do you foresee the future, next 5 years or 10 years? I am very hopeful, I must tell you that.
Let's try, but I'm not so optimistic as you are. First of all, if the media do that, it has not the same importance anymore as it had 20 years ago. The possibility of social media with all the hatred in it, uncontrollable hatred, has much more impact nowadays of the thinking of young people than any media ever has had. We have in the last 5 to 10 years a total change in that. And this is not controllable so far we know nowadays. But we have to see also that these big companies who have to do with the social media have to play a much more responsible role. And if I see this fight with Facebook and others, how hate speech can be controlled and can be left out, then I see we have to do here much more in that sense. And we have to force these big American companies, but also the Russians who use that with American technology to play a role of hate information and wrong and fateful information, that we talk now about the post-factual societies. And you can win election campaigns with that, as we have seen shortly. And is that the basis? You win easier elections when you lie and terror other people. And it's not corrected. So we have to find a way that politicians, main media people, in schools, everywhere, people are trained how to deal with this no form of informations, that they can make a difference between what is a lie and what is not a lie. Go back to this very principal question, what is a lie and what is not a lie? These people do not understand, citizens do not understand it, especially not young people understand it. If we get thousands of information on one point, then you, as a normal citizen, have no chance to find out what is a lie and what is not a lie. And then you have these problems that we have at the moment. And if we do not overcome this question, and here we have to see it's an international question. The social media are international. It's not controllable by educational system of states. Educational system of states play a minor role more like national media in this question. And I think here we have to find a new way of an international understanding with how to deal with the social media in a responsible way without destroying any right of free speech that are not be misunderstood. But it must be clear to differentiate between truth and lie.
One question from me. I very much like the undertone in your talk, where you put emphasis on tolerance, and that we should respect each other, and we should not think that one culture was better than another. But is there a danger that this leads us to tolerate injustices? And if we do not go outside of our culture, coming from Europe, I come from the European heritage, so to speak, if we compare our way of thinking, our culture today, democratic, egalitarian, with what we had in feudal times, my question is, have we not moved forward? Couldn't we say that things are better morally, ethically, culturally today than in those days? So I'm asking about, this tolerance, which is good. Can it not lead to a kind of relativism which leads us astray?
I think that's exactly a point. First of all, for me, in my younger years, the Netherlands, for example, and the Scandinavian countries were always an example for tolerance, consent societies. And I see now that in the Netherlands, like a country, this is just the other way around. It has changed totally in the other direction. And that the success story of Wilders has to do with that. That means, and that is my point, if you understand under tolerance in a consent society, yet you cannot express anymore your own opinion or your own beliefs, then at the end it will go in the other direction. Now, my understanding of tolerance is a different one. Therefore, I mentioned that I'm a Catholic, per purpose. You have to stand for your beliefs. You have to show that you are convinced in your beliefs. And from that point of view, you can get credibility with people of other beliefs. When in Germany, I discussed with my Turkish friends, I got the experience, the more they see that I come from this Christian point of view, the more understanding I find with them, because they come from the Muslim point of view. And then it's not far away that we meet each other, and on both sides understand if we express our beliefs, that's tolerance. Not forget your own values and be tolerant only to them. You have no credibility with Muslims, for example. But as a Christian, convinced Christian, in a discussion with Muslims, you get credibility. And I think this way is, quite important. Tolerance is not to forget your own values, but to stick to our values, so from that point of view, to find a way of tolerance.